for the UPSC exam success are becoming a reality every day. I welcome you to today's Hindu newspaper analysis, and this is the Hindu Hyderabad edition for today. That's your 13th of June 2025, and the very first page of the newspaper opens with a very tragic episode that has happened yesterday, which we are aware about, where the Air India flight with about 242 passengers on board was experiencing certain technical glitches, but until the very end, before the takeoff, it wasn't discovered that whether the non-working of the air conditioner or the remote controls would lead to something as unforeseen and as catastrophic. The flight, which just took off from the Sardar International Airport about 1:38 p.m. experienced a sudden crash. Only the fumes of smoke were visible, and the most unfortunate thing was that the plane happened to crash right on the premises of a medical college here, about few kilometers away from the airport. Now, it is said that apart from one passenger now, which is a very miraculous, a very uncanny escape, most people on board could not be rescued. The major problem is that it again brings under scanner the poor safety protocols that we are following in terms of our aviation industry safety standards, because this is not just the first incident. Of course, this is a major episode of mortality of these many passengers, but in the last few months, consistently, many commercial airplanes in India have been experiencing technical glitches. Some complain it's because of the ill-designed runway platforms in certain states, particularly in few airports in peninsular India, in the northeast India. Some say it is because the fuel measurement was not done appropriately. Some say it's because of transmission problem, but all in all, it's pretty much playing with the lives of passengers. So therefore, this particular flight was the Boeing 787-8 aircraft, and it was scheduled to be heading towards the Gatwick Airport in London. But then immediately after the takeoff, we know that the plane crashed miserably, and the tragedy, of course, has left shock waves across the world. Condolences are pouring in from countries like the US, Israel, and European Union nations. But apart from that, the saddest thing is that the official count of the casualty is still being done. So we really do not have the clear number, and we will take more on the news as more and more data is emerging on it. Of course, the search is on for the black box, which will contain more recordings of how things unfurled and exactly what went wrong, that completely the plane got derailed. But in a soul-searing incident, this is what is making headlines today. We'll definitely follow up as we have more clarity about how the accident took place and what exactly is the government doing now to ensure some welfare or some financial relief to those who've lost their life. Also, Air India has been contacted. There has been a series of talks going on how to avoid future such incidents, what was missing in terms of safety protocol, all that to be taken up later. Now, alongside that, from the perspective of your exams, there is another short piece of news on the same page, which is economy in nature. It talks about retail inflation. The news says that India's retail inflation across various items of consumption, goods and microservices has experienced a 75-month low of about 2.8%. Now, this is visible in terms of falling prices of food commodities. So this is almost synonymous to a falling food inflation, wherein the purchase price or the retail price of various food products have now been coming down. So which means a more easily acceptable commodity basket or consumer basket to the consumers. Now, please remember, this retail inflation is measured by the consumer price index, and for the first time it has fallen below, very, very low, as compared to the previous low of 2019. The overall figure has been pegged at 2.99 in the financial year 25-26. Now, if this inflation has actually easing down, then it has various repercussions, various impacts on the industry, particularly from the manufacturers' end. Talking about how this inflation in the food and beverages category eased to 1.5% in May 2025, even lower than April estimation. This means seventh time in the same financial year that food inflation has been slowing down, which means vegetables, pulses, spices, meat, all these various items of consumption are experiencing a decline. Now, there is another paradoxical development that when you talk about inflation in edible oils and fruits, so that has remained slightly on a higher level. It's experiencing a double-digit inflation figure. So a lot of people are saying that, is this a result of the last week decision taken by the Reserve Bank of India when it had cut its repo rate? Also, it had cut its cash reserve ratio. So what happens in such situations? There is more disposable income available to the consumers. That sometimes translates into food and beverage inflation as well. So let's keep this in mind and let's see how this development takes ahead, and will RBI take another counter policy to see this kind of a lowering inflation? We are yet to see. And now, having said that, this news again is very crucial here, again on the same page. Now, again, a sad thing happening really in terms of our social equity front, that India is marking a drop in gender parity. What is parity really? Parity means equality. So when you talk about gender parity, you would translate this as equality or the empowerment that women experience in a given society. So here, as per the World Economic Forum, so for your prelims, please remember that the Global Gender Gap Report is created by the World Economic Forum here, and it says that out of total 148 nations, India ranked 131, and our gender parity, our gender equality measure has shown to be about 64.1%. Now, this is very shocking because, talking of South Asia in general, Bangladesh as a country which is most often touted as being rampant for discrimination amongst women, has in fact secured a good rank. So in South Asia, the best performer has been Bangladesh this time. It has gained in terms of women's political participation and more women being employed in the formal workforce of the economy. With regards to India, last time, India had ranked 129 out of 146 countries. So which means that this slip again shows that there is a massive gap in implementation. Now, let's look at the paradox here, because this is coming at a time when we are just waiting for the 1/3 reservation for women to be implemented very soon, where we say that today, as a result of government initiatives like, Janani Suraksha or the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao scheme or Mahila Samman Nidhi scheme, we are witnessing more investment and savings for women. And at the same time, we have this index here. So partially, a lot of people are saying that it could be owing to the high rate of crimes that Indian women experience. Some say that it could be because of the problems of women who are engaged in the agriculture labor segment, the poor incomes that they have. But it is strange that this figure of 68.8% is showing the strongest annual advancement since COVID-19 pandemic. So which means that if India is scoring so low, then which are the countries who are topping the index, where you see more women empowerment generally? These are Iceland, followed by Finland, Norway, UK, New Zealand. Let's remember, these are at the forefront of women empowerment and gender parity. Whereas, do remember India's rank, do remember the agency which releases the index, and what exactly does it show about economy? That's something we need to see. Now, having said that, more of this is the news corresponding to the state. But from the exam point of view, we will stick to the more important news from the editorial section as such. And the editorial section begins here. Okay, now there is this one small article here which doesn't need a very detailed analysis, but there is something mentioned in the article which I want you to notice. The article talks about a crop which has resulted in massive earnings for the farmer, particularly in the Andhra Pradesh area, in the area geographically which is corresponding to the West Godavari district. What is this plant? What is this crop? So this is the oil palm. It says oil palm cultivation has not only caught up majorly across Telangana and other villages of Andhra, it is reshaping the rural economy. It is giving a very higher income to the farmers. There are two reasons. One thing is the government is giving subsidy on its production. When government gives subsidy, government assures farmer a minimum support price, which means that no matter what is the market rate, no matter what is the situation of the economy, the government will readily purchase a certain fixed amount of product from the farmer and give them an income which is higher than the market rate. So the farmers are assured of certain return. Historically, after the Green Revolution, it's been proven that whichever crops have attracted more subsidy are also cultivated the most. Say for example, before Green Revolution, we were a more millet-oriented nation, but post the Green Revolution in India, suddenly we saw a huge surge, especially Punjab, UP, Haryana, Tamil Nadu of cultivation of crops like wheat, rice, pulses. Typically because the government started giving a major subsidy on that, a major support price on that. Something similar is happening here, that we are again caught up in this debate. You see, the debate is between rising farmer income through getting subsidy on oil palm cultivation, which is sold in the market at a higher rate, as well as the government is giving you subsidy here, which is good. The problem is that how ecologically sustainable is this kind of cultivation, given the fact that it needs too much labor. It's a labor investment sector. It is a water intensive sector, which means you need more labor for it, you need more water for this cultivation. Is it in the long term environmentally sustainable? This is a question that this article is asking, and the article also says that even though oil palm means you are economically prospering, you are achieving a better income, which leads to rural empowerment, of course, but as far as environmentalists are concerned, NGOs who are working towards ecological preservation are concerned, it is raising a fear. It says that this plant of oil palm, it grows up, it matures say about 8 to 10 years, and it needs about 250 liters of water per day in an area of this Andhra Telangana region, which is known for its red soil. Now you might have studied about red soil in detail in geography. Also, it's very, very good for certain crops like cashew in particular. Okay, generally it supports a very good cash crop cultivation. So same thing is happening here, but it's water intensive. So much water going in oil palm development could mean a problem of water shortage. Plus, too much agriculture labor is engaged here, which also means that if it's a profitable sector, more and more people would want to grow this crop. So therefore, what happens at the end of the day, according to Indian Institute of Oil Palm Research, the recommended planting density should be 57 plants per acre, but farmers in the vogue of earning more money are doing almost sometimes double of this. So these are certain problems because of the high returns. Eventually what happens, it will lead to environmental degradation as well as overuse of soil and lack of water in the long run, because what happens, most of the irrigation is happening through bore wells. It is a water intensive crop, as I said. So in summers, water availability could become a massive problem. So they are saying, the environmentalists are saying that cultivation is okay, but aggressive cultivation more than the permissible limit tomorrow could lead to soil degradation. You know that once monocropping happens, once the same crop is grown over a period of land for a multiple year period, what starts happening then? Soil nutrients go dry, soil eventually with too much irrigation, there is a concept called soil salinization. Why does that happen? Because of capillary action. There is salt that comes up from the root to the top of the soil, and then it is fertile no more, and then it becomes a vicious cycle of putting more fertilizer, more manure, more herbicide. At the end of the day, it becomes a problem of complete soil profile goes bad. It becomes arid. So therefore, they are saying that rather than growing the same kind of crop, let's just think of biodiversity. So a very good choice could be intercropping. Intercropping is a very wonderful initiative, because when you grow the oil palm, make sure you are also cropping other food crops or other cash crops in between, because intercropping always leads to better soil fertility, more nutrient absorption, particularly soils which are, particularly plants that are rhizobiomes in nature, you know, those which provide protein supplementation to the soil. That's very important. Aeration happens. So that's something that they have recommended. Second thing that they are recommending is that please make sure that you also encourage biodiversity by growing many other kind of crops, so that your groundwater levels are not endangered beyond a certain limit. So if you continue to grow same kind of crop, then what will happen? Again the same thing, let alone the ecological devastation, but economy could also get threatened, because intensively depending on only one kind of a crop would means that you are not interested in doing any cultivation, research or development of other crop materials. So therefore India's oil palm sector is already lopsided. Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala are responsible for 98% of country's oil palm production. Very important point again, because once it became intensive in countries like Malaysia, then what happens? It became a major danger for the native animals in those forests. Forests and forests were erased just to cultivate more and more oil palm. So be sure that in India, these are the states. It could come as a prelims question also when you could talk about oil palm cultivation. So these are the peninsular states which account for 98% of oil palm cultivation and production in India. Now, therefore, we need to redefine the policy in such a way that agreed people are growing oil palm, but we should also make sure that higher and stable incomes are being received by the farmers, but by diversifying their cropping strategy. Not just depending on one thing. Another thing could be the government may also think of taking back certain subsidies to ensure that the farmers are encouraged for other soils as well, especially those who have completely stopped growing paddy and now they are jumping in from paddy cultivation to palm oil cultivation or oil palm cultivation. Okay, that's the pitch of the article. Again, it's about ecological balancing alongside farmer income. And now the more important part of the newspaper, of course, is the edit segment. So in the editorial segment, the first theme is that of your Trump, absolutely, the Trump regime and the tariffs involved. So this article is talking about the dual standards that have been adopted by the US government right now. We know that just few months before, the US government had doubled up its tariffs coming from various countries, particularly China. And then China responded by doing a reciprocal tariff regime. This endangered the supply chain of goods across the world. For countries like India, it became more dangerous because if China was a very great market for US products, and if China would no more be that market, then there was a fear of dumping in Indian market. All the products and all these goods would be rerouted to Indian markets because India is a market with young population, a very consumer oriented market. So which meant that all the products which are now not reaching Chinese markets will naturally land up in Indian markets, and then that leads to a danger of import surplus in India, because when too much foreign products come and there's too much cheaper price in which they are available, yes, absolutely, as you said, it creates a problem of too much import dependence. The local manufacturers would suffer. Complete economic dumping happens. These were certain fears. So therefore, India was also in the forefront of negotiating with the US about standardizing the tariffs. Today, we are in a very strange situation. 8th of July is the date. 8 July 2025 is the date given by US to India for finalizing the India-US trade agreement. They say that let's close the agreement by 8 July for sure. But what steps should India take? Why? Let's see. One big problem is that today, as US is saying that we will definitely reduce the tariffs, we will make it easier, but the paradox is that even today, if we aggregate the total tariffs that US is putting solely on Indian products, then they are coming out to be actually more than 50% under certain categories. That's one problem, that they have not reduced much tariffs. Second problem is that US says that we are experiencing a trade deficit today. We have more imports than exports. We are, as an economy, we are suffering right now. So we need to have these tariffs to maintain our economic interests. But when investigation was done more closely, US is claiming that today we are suffering a loss of about $44.4 billion of trade deficit with India. That's a huge loss, and that's the reason why we want to impose these tariffs also. Researchers and economists are saying that every time a trade deficit is not a bad thing. It doesn't just show that economy is in poor shape. Sometimes a trade deficit also means that your consumers have a higher disposable income. That's why they can afford to buy imported products. It could be a sign of a healthy economy too, which they are completely neglecting. For example, it says that a deficit is not always a bad thing for a country's economic development. Sometimes it could indicate more consumer disposable income, more per capita income that you can use to purchase imported goods. Okay, that's what they are saying. So why are you neglecting that aspect and highlighting only the trade deficit thing? Another problem is that US is saying that our trade deficit is about $44.4 billion, but a closer look says that if we were to include all the financial services, all the services including education, then rather than suffering loss, in fact, US is having an overall surplus of $35 billion to $40 billion with regards to trade with India. So it's a complete paradox that they are pointing out towards. Okay, so that is one problem. Another problem is that despite the fact that US says that we have cut down our tariffs, in India the situation right now is that the US has increased the existing tariffs to 25% on steel, 10% on aluminium imports, and 50% in total when you calculate both these sectors. So which means it's very much still on the higher side. And then we are expected to close the trade deal by 8th of July. That's the dilemma we are left with. One thing is that the tariffs remain to be high. Another thing is that the reason highlighted doesn't make any sense. Okay, so therefore, despite a group of industries, a group of industrialists right in the US who have challenged the decision of Trump's administration of imposing a tax which is way beyond the framework even allowed by the World Trade Organization. Today, as many countries are filing complaints against US in the WHO, including China, of course, that's a key opposer. Then you have Turkey, Switzerland, Norway. All these countries are highlighting the improper taxation done by the US in these forums, but India could not even openly criticize. That's the problem. Diplomatically, India was not in a situation because Trump government actually forced India to not do any kind of a complaint, but India withdrew its complaint on the basis of Trump-sponsored, mutually agreed solution. So therefore, India was not in a position to even highlight a complaint there. And now this new 50% of tariff on steel and aluminium means that in no way are we having a parity or an equality-based tariff agreement, trade tax agreement anymore. So what choices is India really left with, given that the deadline of closing the deal is just round the corner? Now, in any trade agreement with the US, a careful balance of India's interests is very, very important. Say, for example, any deal which ensures removing all the tax on Indian exports should be created in such a way that all the US companies operating from India should be allowed a subsidized, a lower tariff rate. For example, today US says that if Apple shifts its operations to India, we will put double taxation on Apple. Again, this is not in Indian interest at all. So that is again something it is highlighting. And one more issue is there, that because of the anti-immigration policy of the Trump, given that Indian workforce in the US is very paramount, there is a lot of student migration to the US. Today, the prospect of H-1B visas getting suspended is another fear for India. So on the diplomatic front, openly criticizing US is not an option that we are having in the interest of larger partnership across diverse sectors, because then Indian employees will face a backlash. They may lose jobs and it will add to the unemployment burden in India itself. So therefore, it is equally important to solve these differences through cross-border trade in services by respecting the kind of data interaction, people interaction, and whatever agreement today we do, it should not only be aligned to India's commitment to the WTO, but also it has to balance India-US partnership across many sectors. So therefore, these are the ethical dilemmas that India is dealing with right now with regards to closing the trade deal as such. And then there is an article here which talks about urbanization and the challenge of ideal transit solutions. When we talk of transit solution, we are talking about urban mobility. We are talking about urban transport system. In general, we can call it urban mobility problem. So therefore, this article is making a pitch towards urban mobility. What does the article really say? The article says that as per the United Nations estimates, by 2047, there are 2 regions in the world which will globalize to more than 60%, because in the Western nations already too much globalization has happened. They are experiencing overheating urbanization, which means saturated with urbanization. But there are 2 continents, one is Africa and then one is Asia, where majority of urbanization will happen by 2049. Specifically talking about India, already we know that close to 40% population or even more today is urbanized. By 2051, it will increase to the limit that we will have 50% population in the urban sector, which means India is a quick urbanizing nation. Very fast-paced urbanization is happening. Another reason behind Indian urbanization being so quick is because low productive rural economy. We know that always in most of the countries, the one big reason for urbanization to happen very fast is generally industrial development. In India, apart from industrialization, a bigger problem is urban pull factors. Urban pull factors means in India already agriculture is a low productivity job. Land fragmentation is one reason that is implicitly highlighted in the article. Very low per capita income. Seasonal disguised unemployment, okay, lack of soil fertility, poor returns, lack of mechanization of agriculture. All these situations have led to a situation now, a circumstance where agricultural income is very low. So which means people are motivated to leave the agriculture sector and go to urban India to find better jobs which are higher paying. Though in reality it wouldn't happen, but that's the aspiration people have. That means urban area has a pull factor. It pulls people towards itself. This consistent rural to urban migration has created an expanding urbanization in India. 60% of Indian population is moving from rural to urban only because urban sector shows the prospect of a much higher job, and this population will only double by 2060. as far as the Viksit Bharat, the very industrialized, developed India campaign 2047 is concerned, urban India will be the engine of growth of Indian economy in days to come. But the problem is, as compared to say other countries like China, we have done urbanization, but our urbanization is not fulfilling the needs of the urban dwellers. There is a very famous United Nations right to the city. If you are aware of that right says that, the UN right to the city, it says that every individual who is a citizen of urban India has some basic rights to infrastructure. Among that infrastructure, urban transportation is a key element. In India today, what we majorly lack is smart cities are there. But the smart cities do not offer the right urban mobility to people, which means people still consistently either use private transportation, or the cost of the public transportation, if it's low, then the quality is poor. If the quality is good, then the cost is so much that the common man can barely afford it. So therefore, today in India, the biggest challenge is to provide better mobility on a large scale to people, particularly in the metro cities, the bigger cities. So unlike China, we are not seeing that in India, the smart cities are becoming such that they are able to align with the infrastructural needs of the people. There is a very big challenge for Indian policy makers, especially in tier 1 metro cities, the cities with greater population and a larger square feet area, a bigger area in general. Having said that, the government is now trying to focus on augmenting. Now, when I say augmenting, improving public transport system to meet the needs of urban mobility, urban transportation. For example, the government is introducing PM, Prime Minister E-Bus Seva Payment Security Mechanism. The aim is that we will improve urban bus transportation in India. About 10,000 urban buses shall be introduced at a subsidized fare. Prime Minister Electric Drive Revolution in Innovative Vehicle Enhancement, quite important, PM E-Drive scheme. This was also introduced. It will support 14,000 new electronic buses, 1,10,000 e-rickshaws, e-trucks and e-ambulances. So a lot of electronic vehicular investment we are doing just because of creating low carbon emission and allowing people more and more means to travel. But the problem is that this is way below our requirement. Today also, out of all this committed promise, 35,000 e-buses are operating and the need is way higher. So which means one thing is there is a lack of sufficient transportation in the first place. Another problem is that we are today trying to develop metro networks in tier 1 cities. Even in metro networks, the problem is that they do not allow last mile connectivity. What is last mile connectivity? Most people avoid using metros because they do not provide you the door-to-door transportation system. You have to leave a metro and then travel through some other means of transport. To a lot of people who can afford private cars and vehicles, it is not a sustainable option, and therefore, quite unlike Brazil and China, people in India, therefore, they find it more easy and more convenient to follow their own transportation methods. So therefore, India has not been able to develop an efficient public transportation system at all. For example, in the budget that was released on Jan 31, it said only 31% of urban residents in India have an easy access to public transportation. That's very less. That's very, very less. Having said that, the development of metro network again needs heavy investment. It's a very expensive venture. That's again a problem. Another problem, as I said, is last mile connectivity from the residents' viewpoint. And then, unlike in certain very developed countries, public transportation there is extremely cheap. But in India, what is happening? Our government then is not even financially rich enough to provide sufficient subsidy to encourage people to completely stop private transportation and shift towards public transportation. What alternatives can we have today? Now, if we need a cost-effective road-based public transport, which ensures you door-to-door last mile connectivity, you have to allocate more fund in the budget to increase more money for right kind of bus systems in India, especially in the metro cities where more and more of the working population is residing. Then private investment also in this sector is very poor. We should allow for more private-public partnership. But private sector doesn't really invest here because it is still uncertain. There is no guarantee of any profit that's going to come by privatization of transportation, particularly electronic transportation. Now, shifting to CNG and affording more expensive buses is a problem because then people will not be able to afford such expensive fares in the first place. Okay, so now what is happening is that today we are caught up in a situation where either we see the revenue analysis model, should we go for a higher profit aiming, or should we try to consider a situation where we completely subsidize the cost and just encourage people to take up public transportation even if the government is spending a little extra and facing loss there. That is something that we need to take a call on. Now, revenue generation, getting more money, and economic viability, economic profit over time are necessary parameters to explain urban road-based public transport as a financial deficit making decision or a profit cycle decision. So clearly the article is ending with the same note that it's up to you, you take a call. Either you go for a financial loss but then completely subsidize your public transport scheme like Brazil, China. It will be successful. Or you think of profit making and then you have to be prepared for a situation where a majority of people will continue using extremely polluting conventional vehicles. That's what the article says. This is a critical question. Are we truly investing in sustainable and cost-effective transport solution? Or are we just chasing a future where subsidies will completely play the most important role? So this is something we need to think about. That's what the article says. And now, okay, this is not so important here. This we'll take up later. Yeah, there's another piece of news here on the world column. It talks about the International Atomic Energy Agency. So this IAEA, a UN nuclear monitoring agency, has criticized Iran actually. Iran for not following and not complying with the nuclear obligations. Now we all know that Iran has been for a very long time under the Vienna-based IAEA agency, but this time the United Nations nuclear watchdog agency IAEA says that Iran is not complying with its nuclear obligations, which means that not just its nuclear plants are not situated in a safe, secure location. Its enrichment facility is situated in a place where in future there could be a threat of any radioactive leakage. It's unsafe for the citizens and public. Another thing is that there are certain other measures like declaring openly your capacity, declaring your maintenance protocols. That is also something that has not been done. So Iran has had to respond to this accusation, and the negotiations that are yet going on. It says that today 19 countries on the IAEA board, they represent agencies' member nations. They have together voted for a resolution according to which they say that some voting has been done, and many countries have together criticized Iranian in general a very evasive policy on its nuclear commitments. Then the article is saying that due to increased regional tensions that are happening, especially yesterday as we saw between Israel and Iraq, and all these countries are now becoming a part of another big conflict that is yet brimming. So in this situation, having a nuclear program that is not clearly disclosed to the United Nations could in future cause more security concerns, and therefore there is a clear-cut documentation that is needed. So do remember about IAEA, do remember about the Iran's nuclear enrichment program, the protocols that have to be followed. And with that, another small piece of news, but again this is nothing new because it's often in the news, the China and the Japan tensions over, you know, airplanes, jets and drones that are flying into each other's territories. Now this also reminds me of many islands. There are many islands such as the Senkaku Islands and so many which are situated in a position where Chinese aggression in the South China Sea has been so much that they are blaming Japan for having occupied many of their island nations, and Japan has counter claims to that. So this article is quite in that background. It says that both the countries blamed each other of using fighter jet that came very, very close to each other's territories or monitoring airplanes, and both the countries have said that, especially China says that it's a serious concern because it could have caused accidental collisions, and of course Japan has refuted the claim. But having said that, again it shows another new aspect of global diplomacy, because just 2 days back we were doing an article on drones, that there are certain drones which are able to elude. They can, delude by not getting captured through the monitoring system. So when these kind of situations come, it is yet to be seen how drone technology also could be used in certain such disputed islands such as the East China Sea Islands, where countries are making claims on each other. So that is one important thing to cover. And then okay, so on the science page, this is not particularly important as such. The only pitch that this article has made is that there has to be a protocol in which the AC temperature should be fixed at a particular limit, say from about, at maximum about 24 degrees. The logic being that the kind of constant fluctuation in temperatures that the users do, it leads to overconsumption of electricity, which means it is definitely not eco-friendly, and therefore having such protocols for a consumer goods segment which is very much in demand, especially in the summer seasons, it could mean that with every 1 degree Celsius increase in the AC temperature, there is about more 6% electricity that's being consumed. The principle behind this is to collect air from outside and then use a refrigerant, use a coolant to cool it down. So therefore, in order to reduce the usage of electricity and in general for meeting our emission targets, it's crucial that we have this kind of a protocol and make sure that the newer systems that are being developed are coming with some kind of a guideline regarding WHO's 2018 Housing and Health Guideline, where using 18 degree as the minimum temperature should be considered safe for internal cooling, also because it somewhere endangers your cardiovascular and respiratory health too. So that is all for this article, nothing majorly, and I think that's it for today's newspaper that we'll see. And with regards to the development of Bangladesh and how Bangladesh is slowly slipping into dictatorship, so I think there shall be another article soon that we're expecting because of the ongoing developments there. We'll take it up in more detail later. That's all for today's newspaper then, and thank you so much, and do share, follow, subscribe our channel for all the latest updates, for all the latest news analysis sessions, and I'll see you tomorrow quickly with another such interesting Hindu analysis. Thank you.